The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath the blazing sun, silent except for the low hum of American engines. On board the USS Enterprise, young radar operators stared at a flickering screen, watching a distant dot move slowly across the grid. It was more than 23 miles away, far beyond the range anyone thought possible. "Sir, that's a Japanese ship," whispered one of them. The officer glanced over his shoulder and frowned. "Impossible. Our guns can't hit that far." But what happened next would rewrite the very idea of naval warfare, and prove that even the impossible was only a matter of precision, courage, and timing. If you love hidden moments from World War II that changed history forever, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because what happens next will leave you speechless. It was early 1944. The Pacific War had turned into a deadly chess game between America and Japan. Both nations were pushing technology, courage, and desperation to the limit. The Japanese Navy still controlled vast stretches of the ocean, but the Americans had one secret edge: long-range precision. Inside the Enterprise's gunnery room, Commander John R. Manners and his team were experimenting with something new: a radar-guided targeting system. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even battle-tested. But Manners believed it could change the war. When radar picked up the Japanese cruiser Agano nearly 23 miles away, no one believed they could hit it. Even the most advanced naval guns had a range of about 20 miles. And at that distance, wind, Earth's curvature, and even humidity could send a shell thousands of feet off target. But Manners was determined. "Lock on target," he ordered. His crew hesitated. "Sir, that's too far." "Then we make it close," he replied. The gunnery team recalculated, adjusting for curvature, temperature, and sea movement. Values that had never been used together in battle before. One by one, the massive 16-inch guns roared to life. The first shell screamed across the sky, vanishing into the horizon. No one spoke. 30 seconds later, a faint explosion appeared in the distance. "Missed by half a mile," said the radar operator. "Correct and fire again," Manners said calmly. The second shot was closer, the third even more precise. And then the fourth shell hit. 23 miles away, the Agano's crew barely saw it coming. A direct strike tore through the mid-deck, igniting fuel tanks and sending black smoke billowing into the sky. Panic spread across the ship. The Japanese commander couldn't believe it. The Americans had struck from a range once considered mathematically impossible. Back on the Enterprise, cheers erupted across the deck. It wasn't just a lucky hit. It was the dawn of radar-guided warfare. A single innovation had just rewritten naval history. Manners stood silently, watching through his binoculars. "Gentlemen," he said, "the ocean just got smaller." Aboard the Japanese cruiser Agano, smoke filled the air. The metallic scent of fuel and fire mixed with the cries of sailors rushing to seal the blast doors. Captain Kiyoshi Tamura, his white uniform stained with soot, stood motionless on the bridge. His ship had just been hit, from beyond visual range. "How?" he whispered, staring toward the horizon where no enemy could be seen. No shell travels that far, but it had. And in that moment, the myth of Japanese naval invincibility began to crumble. Back in Tokyo, the report arrived 2 days later. Coded, urgent, and unbelievable. "Struck by long-range artillery fire, range exceeding 36 kilometers," read the intelligence summary. Admiral Minaichi Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, slammed the file shut. "That's impossible, American propaganda." But the photos didn't lie. Grainy aerial reconnaissance from a nearby Japanese scout plane showed the Agano burning, its midsection torn apart, and no American ships visible within range. "How could they do this?" demanded Vice Admiral Kusaka, leaning over the table. "No conventional gun can reach that distance," a younger officer spoke softly. "Unless they're using radar." The room fell silent. Radar, the new ghost of modern warfare. The Japanese Navy had heard whispers of America's experiments with it, but they believed it was unreliable. A toy for engineers, not a weapon for war. Koga turned slowly toward his intelligence aide. "If the Americans can see us before we see them." "Then, sir," the aide replied grimly, "the Empire's fleets are blind." Meanwhile, on the USS Enterprise, Commander John R. Manners was facing his own storm. Not of battle, but of disbelief. Reports from Washington were pouring in. Confirm strike range, confirm accuracy. Was it a fluke? But it wasn't luck. It was precision. The result of months of secret collaboration between U.S. engineers and radar technicians. Hidden deep within the ship's command tower was a compact device known as the Mark 8 Fire Control Radar, capable of detecting and tracking targets over 30 miles away. Until that day, it had never been tested in real combat. Now it had just made history. In the war room, Manners pointed at the plotting board. "Gentlemen, this is the future. Radar doesn't just help us aim. It changes how we think about war. Distance is no longer safety," a lieutenant grinned. "Sir, we just hit them with mathematics." The Japanese High Command reacted swiftly. Within weeks, they began a secret project codenamed Operation Mirror Eye, an urgent attempt to replicate American radar capabilities. Engineers in Yokosuka and Kure worked day and night, salvaging parts from downed Allied planes, experimenting with radio waves, and even reverse engineering British radar pieces captured in Singapore. But Japan was behind, critically behind. Their scientists lacked access to the ultra-pure vacuum tubes and precision oscillators that made American radar so powerful. Every experiment failed to achieve range accuracy beyond 10 miles. At the same time, American naval groups were quietly fitting every battleship and cruiser with radar-guided guns. Japan still relied on human spotters, binoculars, and night flares, tools of the past. Admiral Koga knew it. "Every day we delay," he said bitterly, "is a day the ocean grows darker for us." By mid-1944, the consequences of that one strike 23 miles away became brutally clear. American ships could now engage targets before the enemy even saw them. Battles that once depended on visibility, like night raids and storm engagements, became one-sided massacres. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan lost over 400 aircraft in a single day, many shot down by ships using radar-assisted targeting systems. Pilots described the horror of flying into invisible gunfire. "They knew where we were before we even appeared," said one survivor. Back in Tokyo, intelligence officer Shigeru Miki wrote a report marked Top Secret. "The Americans have weaponized the invisible. We cannot win what we cannot see." Commander Manners stood on the deck of the Enterprise, watching the setting sun burn over the Pacific. He wasn't celebrating. "We didn't just hit them," he said quietly to his radar officer. "We changed the rules." And though no one could see it yet, that single long-range hit marked the beginning of a new kind of warfare. One where the eye was replaced by the signal, and the future of battle was decided not by distance, but by data. The news of America's radar-guided strike spread like wildfire through Japan's military intelligence circles. It was whispered among pilots, debated by engineers, and denied by officials who refused to believe that the empire could be outmatched by technology. But deep down, the truth was sinking in. Japan was fighting an enemy that could see through the dark. In early 1944, Japan began rushing to counter the growing American advantage. Scientists at the Naval Technical Research Institute were ordered to replicate radar systems from scratch. Dozens of research labs were set up across Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka. Components were scavenged from wrecked Allied bombers, and engineers worked around the clock trying to unlock the mystery behind the invisible detection system. But they were fighting a battle they could never win. Japan's industrial capacity was already strained to its breaking point. The U.S. radar relied on advanced magnetrons and vacuum tubes, technologies Japan couldn't mass-produce with the precision needed. Their improvised systems could barely detect a ship within 10 miles, while the American radar reached far beyond 20, and did so with deadly accuracy. While Japan scrambled in laboratories, America moved on the battlefield. Across the Pacific, Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet was preparing for the Marianas Campaign, a massive offensive to punch through Japan's defensive perimeter. The newly radar-equipped carriers Enterprise, Lexington, and Hornet led the charge, their gun crews now guided by the unseen eye of the Mark 8 radar. When Japanese scouts first detected the U.S. fleet, they radioed back in panic. "They are shooting before we are in range. Impossible! Impossible!" But it was possible. The Americans had mastered coordinated radar tracking. Destroyers could detect enemy aircraft miles before they appeared visually. They could calculate trajectories, feed data to fire control computers, and unleash waves of anti-aircraft fire with mathematical precision. Then came the day that sealed Japan's fate. June 19, 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea. Japan launched nearly 400 aircraft to crush the American fleet in one decisive strike. They called it Operation Ago, but what awaited them wasn't chaos or confusion. It was radar perfection. As the first wave of Japanese planes approached, American radar screens lit up with hundreds of tiny blips. Operators calmly tracked their approach, relaying data to the gun crews and fighter squadrons. Bogies, range 50 miles, altitude 20,000 feet. Prepare to engage. Within minutes, American Hellcats were in the air, intercepting the attackers long before they came close to their targets. Anti-aircraft guns, guided by radar, filled the sky with shells that burst in precise patterns. Japanese pilots, flying into an unseen storm, were cut down before they ever saw the ships. By sunset, Japan had lost nearly all of its first strike force. The next day they tried again, and lost even more. When the smoke cleared, more than 400 Japanese planes had been destroyed. The Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. For Japan, it was the death of its air power. Pilots returned home horrified, telling their superiors that it was no longer a battle between men. It was a battle between man and machine. In Tokyo, Admiral Toyoda Soemu read the reports in silence. He didn't need more evidence. America's mastery of radar had changed the ocean itself. "We have entered the age of invisible war," he said bitterly. Meanwhile, in Washington, U.S. Navy engineers continued improving radar technology at a staggering pace. New systems like the SG and SK radars were being fitted to every major warship. By late 1944, even destroyers had radar-guided fire control systems capable of tracking ships, planes, and submarines. In one intercepted Japanese communication, a frustrated admiral admitted, "Our eyes are closed while theirs are wide open. The sea no longer belongs to us." For the sailors aboard the American fleet, the war felt different now. The fear of surprise attacks was fading. They had a godlike awareness of the battlefield. They could see enemy movements long before danger appeared. But with that power came a quiet unease. Some officers began to wonder if war had lost its human element. Commander John Manners, the radar officer aboard the Enterprise, watched blips vanish one after another on his green glowing screen and whispered, "We're killing ghosts now." By the end of 1944, Japan's naval strategy was in ruins. The long-range strike from 23 miles away had been more than just a single victory. It had signaled a new kind of warfare. The balance of power had shifted forever, and Japan was left chasing shadows across an ocean it no longer controlled. As 1944 drew to a close, Japan's empire stood surrounded, not just by American fleets, but by something more terrifying. A technology they could not see, could not hear, could not touch. The radar had turned the ocean itself into a weapon. In Tokyo, high-ranking officers sat around a long wooden table, their faces pale in the flickering light of blackout lamps. Reports from the front arrived daily. Convoys vanishing without a trace. Air raids detected long before the first siren wailed. America was striking with supernatural precision. General Hideki Tojo, his voice hoarse with anger, slammed his fist against the table. How do they know we're coming before we even leave the ground? No one answered. The truth was unbearable. Japan's once feared Zero fighters were being shredded in the sky, their pilots blinded by radar-guided flak. Ships that had once ruled the Pacific were now hunted prey, their steel hulls glowing like ghosts on American radar screens. By early 1945, the U.S. had fully perfected radar warfare. The newly introduced B-29 Superfortress bombers, equipped with AN/APQ-13 radar, could fly through total darkness and drop bombs with astonishing accuracy. Cities that had survived the war so far, Kobe, Nagoya, and Tokyo, were now under fire from invisible enemies in the night sky. For Japanese civilians, it felt as though death itself had become invisible. They could no longer hear the enemy coming. The once reliable hum of distant engines, the sirens that warned of approaching planes, they were now useless. When the bombs began to fall, it was already too late. And still, Japan refused to surrender. Pride, tradition, and denial held the empire together, even as its foundations burned. The Imperial Navy made one final desperate gamble, a secret mission known as Operation Tengo. In April 1945, the mighty battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built, set sail on a suicide mission toward Okinawa. She carried barely enough fuel for a one-way trip. The plan was madness. Beach the ship, use her guns as stationary coastal defense, and die fighting. But the Americans were watching. From hundreds of miles away, radar picked up Yamato's massive silhouette gliding through the East China Sea. Within hours, Admiral Mark Mitcher's carriers launched wave after wave of aircraft. Radar-directed fighters found their target long before Japanese lookouts saw a single enemy. The sky over Yamato turned into a storm of bombs and torpedoes. One by one, the ship's turrets fell silent. As the water rushed in, her captain stood on the deck, saluted the rising sun flag, and went down with his crew. The last message sent from the ship's radio said only one thing: "Enemy sees everything. We are blind." After that, Japan's naval power ceased to exist. The once mighty empire of the Pacific had been reduced to ruins, its skies ruled by American bombers, its seas by radar-guided fleets. In August 1945, when the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war's ending seemed inevitable. But for many military historians, the true turning point had come much earlier. The moment radar changed the balance of power. A single strike, 23 miles away, had started it all. A demonstration that knowledge, not firepower, wins wars. When the war ended, American engineers opened Japan's captured radar labs. Inside, they found sketches, prototypes, and desperate notes scribbled in the margins, attempts to copy the technology that had already destroyed them. One paper read simply, "We must see as they see, or we will vanish." That vision, the quest for technological supremacy, would soon define the next era. The Cold War was already beginning, and radar would evolve into something far more advanced. Satellites, guidance systems, and missiles that could lock onto a target from thousands of miles away. But for the men who fought in the Pacific, the memory of those invisible battles never faded. Pilots would remember seeing tracers erupt from the darkness, ships firing at enemies no one could see. Radar had not only won a war, it had changed what war was. As one U.S. Navy officer later said, "It wasn't the bomb that won the Pacific. It was the eye that could see in the dark." And so, in the end, the story of that single impossible strike, 23 miles away, was more than a moment of victory. It was a warning, a reminder that in every war, it is not the loudest weapon that wins, but the one no one can see coming.